It's 430,000 years ago. You're standing in what will one day be called Spain, though that word is so far in the future, it's basically science fiction. You're not quite human. Not yet. But you're close enough that the distinction feels cruel to make. And someone near you, someone from your own group, someone you probably knew, just picked up a weapon. What happened next is something we can read in bone, because bone remembers. Even after 430,000 years, bone remembers. This is the story of the first murder in human history. Or rather, the first murder we can prove. And the distinction between those two things is important, uncomfortable, and genuinely fascinating. Because when you follow this story all the way back, through the cave, through the fossil record, through 500,000 years of forensic evidence buried in rock and sediment, what you find isn't just a crime. And what you find is a mirror. And what it shows you about our species is something no history class ever prepared you for. Let's start with the cave. In 1994, in the Atapuerca Mountains of northern Spain, a team of paleontologists was excavating a site they called the Sima de los Huesos. In Spanish, that translates directly to the pit of bones, and that name turns out to be extremely accurate. At the bottom of a vertical shaft, roughly 13 meters underground, they found human remains. Not one individual, not a handful. At least 28 individuals. Skulls, limb bones, jaw fragments, teeth. The largest accumulation of hominin fossils from this time period ever found anywhere on Earth. The individuals buried in that pit weren't Homo sapiens. They were Homo heidelbergensis, an earlier human species that occupied Europe and possibly Africa roughly 700,000 to 200,000 years ago. They walked upright. They used tools. They had brains significantly larger than their predecessors. They almost certainly communicated in some form. They sat somewhere on the long, tangled, imperfectly understood family tree between us and our earliest ancestors. Close enough that looking at a facial reconstruction of one of them would feel deeply, unsettlingly familiar. And one of them was murdered. The individual in question is known to researchers as Cranium 17. A young adult, sex difficult to determine at this distance, found among the other remains at the bottom of the shaft. When forensic anthropologists analyzed the skull, they found something that stopped the room. 2 puncture wounds located on the frontal bone, the forehead, directly overlapping each other. Same location, same angle, same weapon profile. Both wounds penetrating the bone, both consistent with a single blunt, sharp-edged implement swung with significant force. The probability of 2 accidental impacts landing in precisely the same spot at precisely the same angle is, to put it in scientific terms, essentially 0. This wasn't a fall. It wasn't a rock slide. It wasn't an animal. Someone stood in front of or behind this individual, raised a weapon, and brought it down. Twice. In the same place. The researchers who published this analysis in 2015 in the journal Nature were careful. Careful the way scientists always are when they're sitting on something enormous, and they know it. They used language like interpersonal violence and paramortem trauma and most parsimonious explanation. But strip the academic scaffolding away and what they were saying is plain. This was a homicide. The oldest confirmed homicide in the fossil record. By a significant margin, and the weapon, it wasn't found inside the body. It was found elsewhere in the cave, a hand axe, known to researchers as Excalibur, which is either a brilliant piece of naming or the most dramatic thing a paleontologist has ever done, and honestly possibly both. The axe is made from a distinctive red quartzite that doesn't occur naturally in the cave or its immediate surroundings. Someone carried it there. Someone chose it. And when the analysis was done, the wound profiles on Cranium 17 matched its shape. Think about that for a second. We have a victim. We have wounds. We have a weapon. We have a location. The only thing missing is a name. Now, here's where we have to be careful. Because the moment you say, oldest murder, certain questions immediately follow. Did prehistoric humans have the cognitive architecture for intentional killing? Could they plan it? Could they understand death well enough to cause it deliberately? Wasn't violence just survival back then? Wasn't everything just survival? These are fair questions. And the answers are more complicated and more interesting than you might expect. Let's talk about what intentional killing actually requires from a cognitive standpoint. It requires, at minimum, The ability to understand that your actions will produce a specific outcome. It requires some model of another individual as a being with a body that can be damaged. It requires the capacity for what cognitive scientists call goal-directed behavior, doing something specific to achieve a specific result. And Homo heidelbergensis, the species found in the Sima de los Huesos, almost certainly had all of these things. These were not simple creatures. They manufactured stone tools using techniques that require planning ahead of the immediate moment. They coordinated in groups. The sheer number of individuals at the Atapuerca site suggests a social structure of meaningful complexity. Some researchers believe they were already practicing a form of deliberate body deposition, placing the dead somewhere specific, with some intention behind it, which is a behavior so cognitively sophisticated that it still makes anthropologists argue with each other at conferences. The idea that a species capable of crafting a hand axe, organizing group hunts, and possibly ritually depositing their dead was somehow incapable of understanding that hitting someone hard enough in the head would kill them is not a serious scientific position. It's a comfortable one. And comfort, in this particular conversation, is not your friend. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough when people discuss prehistoric violence, and it genuinely changes how you think about all of this. The Sima de los Huesos is not the only evidence. It's the oldest confirmed individual homicide. But signs of violence in the human fossil record don't start at 430,000 years ago and then leap forward to historical warfare. They are present, consistent, and widespread across the entire span of our existence as a genus. A site in Kenya called Naturuk, dated to roughly 10,000 years ago, contains the remains of at least 27 individuals showing evidence of violent death. Blunt force trauma, arrow wounds, bound wrists, a massacre preserved in sediment from the end of the last ice age. Researchers who published this in Nature in 2016 described it as the earliest known evidence of prehistoric warfare, not a duel, not a single killing. An organized, deliberate attack on a group by another group, but go further back, much further. At a site called Crow Creek in South Dakota, dated to roughly 1325 CE, archaeologists found the commingled remains of nearly 500 individuals, men, women, children, showing evidence of scalping, mutilation, and massacre. That's recent enough to have been caused by people who were fully recognizably modern human, which tells us exactly nothing surprising. What tells us something surprising is evidence like the Shanidar Cave Neanderthal, a Neanderthal individual from Iraq, dated to roughly 50,000 years ago, whose remains show a healed stab wound to the ribcage consistent with a spear thrust from a close-range encounter. He survived it. Someone tried to kill him and failed. He walked around afterward for what appears to have been months with that wound healing, in a time and place where antibiotics were not a thing that existed, which is either a testament to Neanderthal resilience or evidence of some form of care from his group, possibly both simultaneously. And then there's a Homo erectus skull from China, dated to roughly 200,000 years ago, showing perimortem cut marks consistent with defleshing, the removal of flesh from bone after death. Was it cannibalism? Was it a mortuary ritual? Was it something we don't have a cultural framework to understand? We genuinely don't know, but the marks are there. And they were made deliberately. The picture that emerges from the fossil record is not a peaceful prehistoric baseline interrupted by the occasional tragic aberration. The picture is complicated, messy, deeply human. Violence appears alongside cooperation, care, ritual, and creativity, not instead of them, right from the very beginning of the record. Now here's the part of the story that most people have never heard. And it might be the most philosophically loaded piece of evidence in this entire conversation. The Sima de los Huesos, the pit of bones, is not just a crime scene. It might also be a burial site. Think about what was found there. 28 individuals, a vertical shaft 13 meters deep. The bones are not scattered in a pattern consistent with natural death at that location. They show no evidence of carnivore activity. No gnaw marks, no drag patterns. The skeletal elements are mostly complete, not the fragmentary, dispersed mess you'd expect from animals dying randomly in a cave system. And then there's Excalibur, the hand axe made from red quartzite that doesn't belong in that cave. the only non-human bone object found in the entire deposit. The researchers who analyzed this site proposed something extraordinary. They proposed that Homo heidelbergensis may have been deliberately depositing their dead in this shaft, carrying the bodies, placing them there, possibly along with at least one carefully chosen object. This would make the Sima de los Huesos the oldest known funerary behavior in the human fossil record, by hundreds of thousands of years. Let that sit for a moment. The oldest evidence of humans killing each other and the oldest evidence of humans ritually honoring their dead come from the same cave, the same species. The same deposit of bones at the bottom of the same 13-meter shaft in the mountains of northern Spain. We are the species that murders and mourns. And apparently we have been for as long as we have been anything recognizable at all. So why? That's the question underneath all of this. Not just why did this specific individual get killed? Why does violence exist in our lineage at all? What does its ancient persistence tell us about what we are? This is where the science gets genuinely contested and genuinely interesting, because there are two camps in this debate, and they've been arguing since before either of them had tenure. The first camp is sometimes called the Hobbesians, after the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who famously described the life of prehistoric humans as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. The argument, updated with modern evidence, goes roughly like this. Resource competition is the driver of violence across all species. Humans, like every other social animal, compete for food, mates, territory, and status. Lethal violence is an extreme expression of that competition, and it appears in our fossil record for the same reason it appears in chimpanzee behavior, in wolf-pack dynamics, in the territorial aggression of virtually every social species with the cognitive capacity to plan an attack. The second camp is the Rousseauians, after a different philosopher with a different view, who argued that humans are naturally peaceful and that violence is a product of civilization, of scarcity, of social inequality. The argument, also updated with modern evidence, goes like this. Hunter-gatherer societies have lower rates of violence than agricultural ones. Inequality drives conflict. Before ownership, before borders, before the concept of mind became enforceable with weapons, humans were more cooperative than violent. The violence in the fossil record is real but rare, isolated, and incomparable to the industrialized slaughter of the last few centuries. And here's where I have to be honest with you about something. Neither camp is entirely right, and neither camp is entirely wrong. And the fossil record, interpreted carefully, supports both positions simultaneously in a way that should make you deeply suspicious of anyone who tells you the answer is simple. What we can say with reasonable confidence is this. Interpersonal violence appears in the human fossil record at every time period we've been able to examine. It predates agriculture. It predates civilization. It predates Homo sapiens. It is not a modern invention. It is not a product of inequality in the way Rousseau imagined. The capacity is old, genuinely, staggeringly old. What we can also say is this. Cooperation appears in the same record, at the same time periods, in the same sites. The Sima de los Huesos contains evidence of both killing and of carrying the dead with care. Neanderthal burials show flowers placed with the body, though that specific claim is contested now, and injured individuals who survived wounds that should have been fatal, which implies someone tended to them. You don't keep an injured group member alive in a Paleolithic environment by accident. You do it because something in you decided that this person mattered enough to spend resources on. The capacity for extraordinary violence and the capacity for extraordinary care are not opposites. They appear to be two expressions of the same underlying cognitive and social architecture. The ability to model other minds, to understand that others have internal states, can be used to predict how to hurt them or how to help them. Empathy and cruelty share a root. This is not a comfortable thing to sit with, but it is, as best we can tell, true. Let's talk about motive. Because a murder investigation without motive is just forensics, and forensics without interpretation is just numbers. For Cranium 17, we cannot know motive with certainty. We are 430, 0 years removed from the moment. We have no witnesses, no testimony, no cultural context that survived in any recoverable form. What we have is the wound, the weapon, and the site. And from those three things, We can make some educated guesses that are grounded in what we know about social dynamics in primate groups generally and early humans specifically. The most likely possibilities are not exotic. They are depressingly familiar. Conflict over resources, a dispute over food, over a mate, over status within the group, an act of dominance, an elimination of a rival, an escalation of something that started as a physical confrontation and ended worse than either party expected, or exactly as one of them intended. Social conflict is not a modern invention. Chimpanzee communities, our closest living relatives, engage in lethal intergroup raids. They have been observed murdering members of their own groups, particularly individuals who challenge dominant males. They have been observed committing what researchers cautiously describe as warfare, organized, coordinated attacks by one group on another, sometimes resulting in the complete elimination of the targeted group. Jane Goodall, who spent decades studying chimpanzees and loved them with a depth that is evident in every page of her writing, described watching this behavior for the first time as one of the most disturbing experiences of her career. She had not expected it. The science had not prepared her for it. What the chimpanzee evidence tells us is not that humans inherited violence from chimps like a package handed down intact. What it tells us is that the social conditions that produce lethal violence, competition, hierarchy, coalition formation, intergroup rivalry, are very old, older than our species, older than our genus. They predate the human experiment by millions of years. We did not invent them. We inherited the conditions that produced them, and then we developed the cognitive sophistication to execute them with unprecedented precision, and eventually, unprecedented scale. A Homo heidelbergensis with a hand axe and a grievance is working with essentially the same social logic as everything that came after. The weapons got better. The justifications got more elaborate. The scale became incomprehensible. But the logic, that logic, is ancient. Here's something genuinely strange to think about. The Sima de los Huesos find changed the conversation about violence in prehistory. But it did something else too, something quieter and equally important. It changed the conversation about who we think ancient humans were. For a long time, the dominant narrative of prehistory was essentially a story of progress. Primitive becomes less primitive. Brutal becomes less brutal. We climb upward from darkness toward light, from violence toward peace, from animal toward human. It's a compelling story. It's also almost certainly wrong. The evidence from sites like Atapuerca doesn't show creatures stumbling blindly through a brutal world without the cognitive or emotional resources to be anything other than violent. It shows creatures with enough social complexity to commit murder, enough symbolic thinking to possibly practice burial rites, and enough group cohesion to survive in conditions that would end most modern humans within a week. These are not transitional creatures waiting to become human. They were what they were, fully adapted, cognitively sophisticated, socially complex beings navigating the same fundamental tensions that humans have navigated ever since. We like to think of ourselves as the culmination, the endpoint of a long process of improvement, the version of the human project that finally got it right. Cranium 17 gently suggests otherwise. There's one more piece of this story that deserves its own moment, because it's the strangest part, and it doesn't get nearly enough attention. After the killing in the Pit of Bones, after Cranium 17 died from those 2 blows to the forehead, someone put the body in the shaft, maybe multiple someones. The act of placing the dead somewhere specific, of carrying a body and choosing where it would rest, is not a neutral logistical decision. It is, as far as we can tell from everything we know about human cognition and human behavior, an act with meaning attached. We don't know what that meaning was. We can't. The gap between us and them is too wide, too full of silence and lost language and vanished context. But we know it wasn't nothing. The placement was deliberate. The location was consistent. 28 individuals, same shaft, over what may have been an extended period of use. Excalibur was placed there too, the only object, suggesting it had some significance attached to it. Whether as a grave good or something else entirely we don't have a framework for. So here is the full picture at the Sima de los Huesos, taken together. A group of beings 400 to 30,000 years ago, in what is now Spain. One of them was killed. The others carried the body to a shaft deep in a cave system and placed it there. And they had apparently been doing this with their dead for long enough that 28 individuals accumulated. The killer and the mourners may have been the same people. The community that produced the murder may have been the same community that produced the burial. This is not a story about monsters. This is a story about something much harder to dismiss than monsters. It's worth pausing here to ask a question that might seem obvious, but turns out to be genuinely difficult to answer. Is the Sima de los Huesos killing actually the first murder, or is it just the oldest one we found? The honest answer is the second one. Definitively and unavoidably, the second one. The fossil record is not a complete archive. It is an almost unimaginably incomplete sample of what actually happened on this planet across hundreds of thousands of years of human and pre-human existence. Soft tissue doesn't fossilize. Most bone doesn't fossilize. Most of what was deposited in most environments has been destroyed by time, by geology, by water, by biological decay. We find what survived. We find what happened to end up in conditions that preserved it. We find the exceptions. The fact that the earliest confirmed homicide is 430,000 years old does not mean violence began 430,000 years ago. It means that's as far back as our current evidence reaches. The actual origin of lethal interpersonal violence in the hominin lineage, the first time any ancestor of ours raised something against another member of their group and used it to kill, that moment is almost certainly much older. We may never find it. The evidence may be long gone, but the conditions that would have produced it, the social structures, the competition, the cognitive capacity, were present long before Atapuerca. This is the archaeology of absence problem. The absence of older evidence is not evidence of absence. It is evidence of the limits of preservation, of excavation, of current knowledge. Every decade of research pushes the timeline of human complexity further back. Every decade, the things we thought were exclusively modern, exclusively Homo sapiens, exclusively recent, turn out to be older, more widespread, more shared across species than we assumed. The first murder probably happened before we have any ability to look. It happened in the dark, in a moment that left no mark we can currently read. And it was followed, eventually, by hundreds of thousands of years of the same tension, the same collision of cooperation and conflict, the same bewildering combination of care and cruelty that shows up in every human record from the earliest fossil to this morning's news. Here's what I keep coming back to when I sit with all of this. We spend a lot of cultural energy imagining prehistoric humans as simpler than us. Less complicated, more animal. The kind of creatures who hadn't yet developed the inner lives required for moral complexity. It's a comforting idea because it lets us locate the darkness somewhere in the past, in a version of ourselves we've moved beyond. The pit of bones makes that comfort impossible. The same deposit that contains the oldest murder in the human fossil record also contains what may be the oldest deliberate burial. The same hands that picked up Excalibur and brought it down on Cranium 17 may have been hands that later carried a body with care into the dark and placed something meaningful beside it. That isn't monstrous. That isn't simple. That is something we recognize. Something that looks, across 430,000 years and an unbridgeable cognitive gap, uncomfortably like us. We are the species that kills members of our own kind. We have always been this. We are also the species that buries our dead and places things we value beside them in the dark. We have always been this too, what the Sima de los Huesos tells us. If you're willing to follow the evidence all the way to where it actually leads, is that the moral complexity we attribute to ourselves, the simultaneous capacity for terrible violence and genuine tenderness, is not a product of civilization. It did not arrive with agriculture, or cities, or language as we know it, or any of the developments we use to mark the boundary between human and pre-human. It was already there, in the same cave, in the same bones, waiting 430 years for someone to come down a shaft with the right equipment and the willingness to read what the rock preserved. The Pit of Bones is not a story about where violence came from. It's a story about where we came from. Both things at once. That's the part nobody tells you.